Ever wonder who really pulled the strings in those grand medieval castles? While kings rode off to battle or struggled with rebellious nobles, secret power often resided in the queen's chambers. Did powerful women secretly shape kingdoms, decide wars, and influence destinies from the shadows, all between the 11th and 16th centuries? Number 13. Elizabeth Woodville. Born into a gentry family, a commoner, Elizabeth Woodville became Queen of England through a secret marriage to King Edward IV in 1464. This union caused a stir among the established nobility, especially with the powerful Earl of Warwick, the kingmaker, who had other plans for Edward's marriage. Elizabeth's family, the Woodvilles and the Widevilles, quickly rose to prominence, securing advantageous marriages and positions at court. Her influence on King Edward was often noted by contemporary observers. Edward's favor towards her family was a constant source of tension with the old nobility. Records show that Elizabeth often received petitions from individuals seeking the king's favor or intervention, and her recommendations frequently led to appointments or grants. She held a particular interest in matters of justice and petitions from the common folk, sometimes interceding directly with the king on their behalf. Chronicler from the time, Polydore Virgil, wrote about her persuasive nature and her significant sway over her husband. When Edward IV was briefly deposed in 1470 and forced to flee, Elizabeth took sanctuary in Westminster Abbey. There, amidst the turmoil, she gave birth to a son, Edward. This act of quiet resilience, securing the royal line in a time of extreme danger, was a crucial step in maintaining the Woodville family's claim to power. While in sanctuary, she was not merely hiding, she was consolidating support and communicating with loyalists. Letters from this period suggest a network of allies working to restore Edward IV, a network Elizabeth helped sustain. Upon Edward IV's restoration, Elizabeth's position became stronger, and her family's influence continued to grow. She used her position to promote her children from her first marriage and her siblings. Her sister Catherine Woodville married the Duke of Buckingham, a powerful magnate. Her brother Anthony Woodville became a respected scholar and diplomat, often representing England in foreign negotiations. The Woodville network became an integral part of the royal administration, effectively giving Elizabeth a significant, though indirect, say, in court policy and appointments. After King Edward IV's sudden death in 1483, Elizabeth faced a new and even more perilous challenge. Her young son, Edward V, was the rightful heir, but his uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, quickly seized control. Elizabeth again sought sanctuary, taking her younger son and daughters with her. While in sanctuary, she navigated complex negotiations with Richard, who was declared Lord Protector. Her actions during this period, though seemingly defensive, were strategic. She refused to surrender her younger son Richard until a truce was arranged. The mystery surrounding the princes in the Tower continues. But Elizabeth's actions during this time were a desperate attempt to protect her children and preserve the Yorkist claim. While she was no longer openly at court, her strategic choices and her refusal to yield all her children show a subtle defiance and an attempt to maintain a position of influence, even if from within the walls of Westminster Abbey. Her later attempts to broker alliances, including a proposed marriage between her daughter Elizabeth and Henry Tudor, indicate her continued engagement in the political landscape, working behind the scenes to secure the future of her family and the stability of the realm. Her resilience in political maneuvering, even in dire circumstances, left a lasting mark on the Wars of the Roses. Number 12. Anne de Beaujeu. Anne de Beaujeu, daughter of King Louis XI of France, emerged as a central figure in French politics after her father's death in 1483. Despite being a woman in a male-dominated court, Louis XI, known for his shrewdness, had entrusted her with significant authority. He reportedly told her to rule France with her husband Pierre de Beaujeu as regent for her young brother Charles VIII, who was only 13. The will was contested by powerful nobles, but Anne, known for her sharp intellect and strong will, immediately asserted her claim. Her regency, which lasted until 1491, was a period of intense political maneuvering and internal strife. The most significant challenge came from a coalition of powerful French princes, including Louis, Duke of Orleans, who believed they should hold the regency. This period is known as the Mad War. Anne, however, demonstrated extraordinary political acumen. She skillfully isolated her opponents, forming alliances and making strategic concessions when necessary. She managed to gather support from the Estates, General France's representative assembly, which largely affirmed her position. Anne's approach to governance was characterized by both firmness and diplomacy. She did not shy away from military action when it was required. During the Mad War, her forces successfully defeated the rebellious princes, culminating in the Battle of Saint-Aubin-du-Cormier in 1488. The Duke of Orleans, her chief rival, was captured and imprisoned. This victory cemented her authority and solidified her control over the young king and the kingdom. Beyond military affairs, Anne displayed a keen understanding of foreign policy. She successfully negotiated the Treaty of Arras in 1482 and the Treaty of Sable in 1488, which helped consolidate French territorial gains and secured peace with foreign powers. One of her most notable achievements was the incorporation of the Duchy of Brittany into the French crown lands. Brittany was a fiercely independent duchy, and its strategic location made its annexation a priority for France. Anne achieved this through a combination of political pressure and strategic marriages. She arranged the marriage of her brother, King Charles VIII, to Anne, Duchess of Brittany, after the Duchess had been previously engaged to Maximilian. This move, though controversial, ensured Brittany's eventual absorption into France. A long-term goal of the French monarchy, Anne also paid close attention to internal administration. She oversaw reforms in the judicial system and encouraged economic stability. She was known to be highly organized, managing the royal finances and ensuring a steady flow of revenue to the crown. Her direct involvement in the day-to-day running of the kingdom, often behind the scenes, ensured that the machinery of government continued to function effectively during Charles VIII's minority. Even after Charles VIII came of age and took full control of the government, Anne's influence did not completely disappear. She remained a trusted advisor to her brother, and her counsel was often sought on critical matters. Her period of regency, despite being contested and turbulent, was widely seen as a successful one, strengthening the French monarchy and laying the groundwork for future expansion. Chroniclers of the time often praised her intelligence and political skill, calling her Madame la Grande, or the Great Lady. Number 11, Joanna I of Naples. Joanna I of Naples, a queen who ascended to the throne in 1343 at the tender age of 16, inherited a kingdom fraught with political intrigue and dynastic rivalries. Her reign, which spanned nearly 40 years, was marked by constant challenges to her authority and accusations of complicity in her husband's murder. Despite the turmoil, Joanna managed to hold onto her throne for decades, navigating a complex web of alliances, betrayals, and papal interventions. Joanna's first husband, Andrew of Hungary, was murdered in 1345, just 2 years into their marriage. The circumstances of his death were suspicious, and Joanna was widely implicated by many, including Andrew's brother, Louis I of Hungary, who subsequently enforced him. She fled to Avignon, the seat of the papacy, which held feudal overlordship over Naples. In Avignon, Joanna faced an ecclesiastical court investigating Andrew's murder. She defended herself vigorously, presenting her case and arguing her innocence. The court, swayed by her arguments and perhaps by political considerations, the papacy did not want to see Naples fall under direct Hungarian control. eventually exonerated her. This public vindication was a significant victory, allowing her to regain a measure of legitimacy and begin the fight to reclaim her kingdom. Her skillful defense and persuasive arguments in the papal court show a shrewd mind at work even in a seemingly helpless situation. Upon returning to Naples, Joanna faced continued challenges. She married 3 more times, each marriage a strategic attempt to secure alliances and produce an heir, and each bringing its own set of complications. Her second husband, Louis of Taranto, helped her regain control of the kingdom from the Hungarians, and for a period they ruled together. However, her decisions on marriage and succession were often met with resistance from various factions within her own family and from powerful nobles. Despite the personal controversies and external pressures, Joanna demonstrated a remarkable ability to govern. She issued numerous decrees, reformed the judicial system, and fostered trade. She actively managed the kingdom's finances, even during times of war. Letters from her chancellery show her direct involvement in administrative matters, from appointing officials to settling disputes between towns. She also cultivated relations with various European powers, particularly with the papacy and the Republic of Florence, using diplomacy to maintain her kingdom's independence. Joanna's court became a center of culture and learning, attracting scholars, artists, and poets. She was a patron of the arts, and her support helped to foster a vibrant intellectual environment in Naples. This cultural patronage, while seemingly separate from political power, was a way to enhance the prestige of her reign and garner support from influential figures. Towards the end of her reign, Joanna faced her greatest challenge when Pope Urban VI, involved in the Western Schism, excommunicated her and declared her kingdom forfeit. He then bestowed Naples upon Charles of Durazzo, a cousin and rival claimant. Joanna, facing an invasion, adopted Louis I, Duke of Anjou, as her heir, sparking a new round of conflict. She was ultimately captured by Charles of Durazzo and later murdered in 1382. Despite her tragic end, Joanna I's long reign, marked by constant struggles and her persistent ability to retain power, offers a compelling portrait of a queen who, against immense odds, managed to govern a turbulent kingdom. Her choices, even when controversial, consistently aimed at preserving her authority and the independence of Naples. Number 10. Melisende, Queen of Jerusalem. Melisende, Queen of Jerusalem, inherited complex and volatile Crusader kingdom in 1131. Her father, King Baldwin II, had explicitly named her as his successor, with her husband, Fulk of Anjou, as co-ruler. This was an unusual arrangement for the time, as it implied an equal share of authority for a queen, rather than the typical role of a consort. From the outset, Melisende demonstrated a clear intent to exercise her full rights as sovereign. Initially, Fulk attempted to sideline Melisende, excluding her from important decisions and favoring his own Norman kinsmen in appointments. However, Melisende was not content to remain a mere figurehead. She had strong support among the native Frankish nobility, and within the church, who resented Fulk's attempts to centralize power and his perceived slights against the queen. Records indicate that she consistently asserted her right to co-rule, and her supporters actively championed her cause. A significant crisis emerged in 1134 when a count in the north, Hugh II of Le Pizet, rebelled against Fulk. During this rebellion, he was also accused of plotting against Melisende. This event served as a catalyst. Melisende and her supporters seized the opportunity to reassert her authority. Chroniclers like William of Tyre, who wrote extensively about the Crusader states, noted that Melisende's supporters in the High Court pressured Fulk to reconcile with his wife and recognize her full co-sovereignty. The resulting power-sharing arrangement meant that all official documents had to be signed by both Melisende and Fulk, indicating their equal status. From this point onwards, Melisende played an active and prominent role in the governance of the kingdom. She presided over the High Court, the kingdom's primary legislative and judicial body, often making crucial decisions. She actively engaged in diplomatic correspondence with foreign powers, including the Byzantine Emperor and the Pope, securing alliances and financial support for the kingdom. Her patronage of religious institutions, particularly the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, strengthened her ties with the powerful clergy and enhanced her legitimacy. When Fulk died in 1143, Melisende became the sole regent for her young son, Baldwin III. This period saw her at the height of her power. She governed decisively, confronting threats from neighboring Muslim states and maintaining internal order. Her chancellery was highly active, issuing charters and decrees in her name. She appointed officials, dispensed justice, and managed the kingdom's finances. She was deeply involved in preparing for the Second Crusade, coordinating with the arriving European forces and advising them on local conditions. As Baldwin III grew older, tensions arose as he sought to exert his own authority. In 1152, he demanded full control, leading to a period of open conflict with his mother. Melisende, however, was not easily swayed. She retained the support of many powerful nobles and retained control over the important city of Naples and its surrounding territories. The dispute was eventually resolved, with Baldwin acknowledging his mother's significant contributions and continuing to consult her on important matters. After the resolution, Melisende continued to wield considerable influence, focusing on church affairs and patronage. She died in 1161, having ruled effectively for 30 years, first as co-ruler and then as sole regent and influential elder statesman, leaving behind a legacy of strong female leadership in a challenging environment. Number 9. Isabella of France. Isabella of France, often known as the She-Wolf of France, was Queen of England as the wife of King Edward II. Their marriage was fraught with tension and political instability, largely due to Edward's favoritism towards male companions and his neglect of his queen and the affairs of the realm. Isabella, a strong-willed princess from a powerful French royal house, found herself increasingly moralized and disrespected by her husband and his favorites. Like Piers Gaveston, and later Hugh Despenser, Edward II's failures in governance and military campaigns, particularly his defeat at Bannockburn in 1314. Isabella, who had initially attempted to mediate between the king and his barons, grew increasingly frustrated with her husband's stubbornness and the Despensers' unchecked influence. The Despensers actively worked to isolate Isabella from her husband, even curtailing her access to funds and territories. This growing animosity fueled her desire for action. In 1325, Isabella traveled to France on a diplomatic mission to negotiate a peace treaty between Edward II and her brother, King Charles IV of France, over the contested territory of Aquitane. This journey became her opportunity. While in France, she famously refused to return to England without her son, Prince Edward, who was also in France, and who she insisted must be released from the control of the Despensers. In Paris, she formed a powerful alliance with Roger Mortimer, an exiled English baron and a bitter enemy of Edward II and the Despensers. Isabella and Mortimer became lovers, and together they began to plot an invasion of England to overthrow Edward II and the Despensers. This was a radical and dangerous move for a queen. She gathered support from various disgruntled English exiles and recruited mercenaries. Her actions were not openly declared as a rebellion against the king, but rather as a mission to free him from the evil counsel of the Despensers and restore order to the realm. This framing allowed her to gain popular support. In September 1326, Isabella and Mortimer landed in England with a small invasion force. The landing sparked a widespread rebellion, with many English nobles and commoners rallying to their cause. Edward II's regime quickly collapsed, and the Despensers were captured and executed. Edward II himself was captured shortly after. While Isabella did not directly seize the crown for herself, her actions effectively led to the deposition of her husband. She publicly declared that her son, Prince Edward, should be crowned king. The deposition of Edward II in 1327 was unprecedented. Although the official line was that Edward had abdicated, it was clear that Isabella and Mortimer had orchestrated his removal. For the next 3 years, Isabella and Mortimer ruled England as regents for the young Edward III. Isabella held significant power, overseeing the government, controlling royal appointments, and managing the royal finances. She issued writs and proclamations in her own name, and her influence was palpable in every aspect of governance. However, their rule became increasingly unpopular due to their extravagant spending and Mortimer's growing arrogance. When Edward III came of age in 1330, he staged a coup seizing Mortimer and executing him. Isabella was stripped of much of her power and placed under house arrest for the remainder of her life, though she was treated with respect. Despite her eventual downfall, Isabella's decisive actions in overthrowing a king and her subsequent regency stand as a clear example of a queen who, from a position of powerlessness, seized control and effectively ruled a kingdom, even if her methods were controversial. Number 8. Margaret of Anjou. Margaret of Anjou, Queen of England as the wife of Henry VI, found herself at the heart of the tumultuous Wars of the Roses in the mid-15th century. Her husband, Henry VI, suffered from bouts of mental illness, rendering him periodically incapable of ruling. This situation thrust Margaret into an unprecedented role, forcing her to become the de facto leader of the Lancastrian cause, a task for which she was not initially prepared, but quickly adapted. When Henry VI experienced his first major mental collapse in 1453, the kingdom was effectively without a ruler. Richard, Duke of York, a powerful magnate with a strong claim to the throne, was appointed protector of the realm. Margaret saw this as a direct threat to her son, Prince Edward, and to the Lancastrian dynasty. She fiercely opposed York's authority and began to consolidate her own power base. Margaret was a formidable woman, described by chroniclers as intelligent, resolute, and politically astute. She actively engaged in court politics, forming alliances with loyal Lancastrian nobles and isolating her rivals. She wrote letters, held private meetings, and used her royal status to rally support for her husband and son. While Henry VI was incapacitated, she effectively controlled the royal household and the machinery of government, issuing orders and making appointments. The Wars of the Roses, a series of civil wars between the houses of Lancaster and York, escalated under Margaret's effective leadership. She raised armies, led military campaigns, and fought on battlefields. In 1455, the First Battle of St. Albans took place, marking the true beginning of open warfare. Margaret personally commanded and advised her generals, demonstrating a strategic mind. She was relentless in her efforts to secure the throne for her son, viewing the Yorkists as usurpers. Margaret's determination was particularly evident after the Battle of Wakefield in 1460, where Richard of York was killed. She led her forces south, achieving a decisive victory at the Second Battle of St. Albans in 1461, where Henry VI was temporarily recaptured. Her troops, however, earned a reputation for brutality, which alienated some potential supporters. Despite this, her actions were those of a military commander and a political leader. Even after her son Edward was proclaimed king by the Lancastrians, Margaret continued to be the driving force behind the cause. She traveled to Scotland and France to secure foreign aid and mercenaries. She mortgaged her own jewels and possessions to finance the war effort. Her diplomatic efforts secured a critical alliance with King Louis XI of France. She was known to be a persuasive negotiator, often outmaneuvering experienced male diplomats. Eventually, the Lancastrian cause suffered significant defeats, and Margaret and Henry VI were forced into exile. Despite this, Margaret refused to give up. She famously allied with her old enemy, Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, who who had switched allegiance from York to Lancaster. This improbable alliance led to a brief restoration of Henry VI in 1470. However, this success was short-lived. Margaret's efforts culminated in the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471, where her forces were decisively defeated and her son Prince Edward was killed. She was subsequently captured and imprisoned. She was eventually ransomed by Louis XI of France and lived out her remaining years in France. Margaret of Anjou's journey from a foreign queen to a fierce military and political leader, effectively ruling a kingdom in chaos and leading an army, is a remarkable example of a woman who stepped into a vacuum of power and truly shaped the destiny of Beaujeu. Number 7. Filipa of Hano. Filipa of Hano, Queen of England and wife of King Edward III, is often remembered for her gentle nature and patronage of the arts. However, beneath this widely accepted image lay a queen who exercised considerable political influence and played a crucial role in governance, especially during her husband's frequent absences on military campaigns. She was not merely a passive consort, but an active participant in the affairs of the kingdom. One of the most striking examples of Filipa's practical power occurred during the 100 Years' War. In 1346, while Edward III was campaigning in France, specifically at the Siege of Calais, England faced a significant threat from the north. David II of Scotland, allied with France, launched an invasion of England, intending to exploit the king's absence. Filipa, who was pregnant at the time, stepped up to rally the English forces. She traveled north to Durham, personally addressing the English army before the Battle of Nephel's Cross. Contemporary chroniclers, such as Jean Froissart, recount her presence on the battlefield, riding among the soldiers, encouraging them with stirring words and reminding them of their loyalty to the king and kingdom. Her presence was reportedly a massive morale booster. The English forces, under the command of the Archbishop of York, achieved a decisive victory, capturing King David II and effectively neutralizing the Scottish threat for many years. This triumph was a significant achievement, safeguarding England's northern border and allowing Edward III to continue his French campaigns without distraction. Filipa's direct involvement in preparing for and inspiring the troops before such a crucial battle highlights her active role beyond the usual queenly duties. Beyond her military involvement, Filipa was a skilled diplomat and an effective regent. During Edward III's numerous campaigns abroad, she was formally appointed regent, on multiple occasions, holding the reins of government. In this capacity, she presided over councils, heard petitions, issued royal mandates, and managed the day-to-day administration of the realm. Records from the royal chancery show that many important documents were issued in her name or under her authority during these periods. She worked closely with the king's counselors and often acted as an intermediary between them and the absent king. Filipa also demonstrated considerable economic acumen. She was a major patron of the wool trade, which was the backbone of England's economy at the time. She supported the establishment of a Flemish weaving colony in Norwich, bringing skilled artisans to England and boosting the textile industry. Her efforts contributed to the kingdom's prosperity and provided vital funds for the ongoing war efforts. Her interest in economic development was not just a hobby. It was a strategic move that strengthened the kingdom's financial base. Her compassion and sense of justice were also noteworthy. During the Siege of Calais, after the city fell, Edward III intended to execute 6 prominent citizens as a punishment for their prolonged resistance. Filipa famously interceded on their behalf, reportedly pleading with Edward on her knees and in tears, ultimately saving their lives. This act, widely celebrated in historical accounts, shows her willingness to directly influence the king's decisions, even on matters of life and death, and her ability to persuade him. Filipa of Hano's influence, while often exercised through her husband or in his absence, was pervasive. She was not a queen who ruled from the shadows in the sense of secrecy, but rather one whose significant contributions to governance, diplomacy, and even military affairs were often overlooked or understated in historical narrative. Her practical actions and leadership during crucial moments undeniably shaped the course of English history during a pivotal era. Number 6. Theodora, Byzantine Empire. Theodora, Empress of the Byzantine Empire and wife of Justinian I, is a figure of immense power and intrigue. While Justinian is credited with many of the empire's achievements, particularly the reform of Roman law, numerous historical accounts indicate that Theodora was his equal in governance, often acting as a hidden force behind the throne. Her rise from humble origins as an actress and courtesan to empress was remarkable, and her influence on Justinian was profound and undeniable. Theodora's political acumen became starkly apparent during the Nika riots of 532 AD. This catastrophic uprising in Constantinople, initially a chariot race dispute, escalated into a full-blown rebellion that threatened to depose Justinian and burn the city. The emperor and his advisors were on the verge of fleeing the capital, convinced that their position was untenable. It was Theodora who stood firm and delivered a powerful speech, refusing to abandon the imperial city. Her famous words, recorded by the historian Procopius in his secret history, declared, "Royalty is a good burial shroud." She asserted that it was better to die an empress than to live in ignominy. This defiant stance shamed and inspired Justinian and his generals. It was her courage and unwavering resolve that ultimately spurred them to launch a counterattack, leading to the brutal suppression of the riots and saving Justinian's reign. This single event cemented her position as a critical, unshakable partner in power. Beyond crisis management, Theodora actively participated in the legislative process. Many of Justinian's reforms, particularly those relating to women's rights, are attributed to her influence. She advocated for laws that protected prostitutes, forbade forced prostitution, established institutions for their rehabilitation, and granted women more rights in divorce and property ownership. These progressive measures, radical for their time, reflect her personal experiences and her deep commitment to social justice, often pushed through against the resistance of more conservative male advisors. Theodora also played a significant role in foreign policy and religious disputes. She maintained her own diplomatic channels and corresponded directly with foreign rulers. She held sway in the complex theological debates of the time, particularly supporting the Miaphysite faction, which often put her at odds with Justinian's official policies. Despite their differing public stances, Justinian often tolerated her views, and even allowed her to offer refuge to persecuted Miaphysite leaders, indicating her strong independent influence within the imperial household. Her Secret History, by Procopius, though controversial and heavily critical, paints a picture of a ruthless and cunning empress who wielded immense power behind the scenes. While the exact details might be exaggerated for dramatic effect, it confirms that contemporaries clearly perceived her as a central figure in imperial decision. Procopius recounts how officials and petitioners would bypass Justinian and go directly to Theodora, knowing that her word carried immense weight. She was known to control appointments, dispense patronage, and even intervene in judicial matters, often bypassing standard procedures to achieve her desired outcomes. Theodora's private audiences and secret meetings were often the true locus of power, where key decisions were made before being formally enacted by Justinian. She created an inner circle of loyal officials who reported directly to her, giving her a private intelligence network. Her reign, though nominally Justinian's, was clearly a co-reign, with Theodora steering the ship of state from a less visible but equally powerful position. Number 5. Isabella of Castile. Isabella I of Castile, often known as Isabella the Catholic, was a queen whose reign dramatically transformed Spain in the course of European history. While she ruled alongside her husband, Ferdinand II of Aragon, their marriage was less a merger of two kingdoms and more a personal union of two powerful independent monarchs. Isabella's personal strength, political acumen, and deep religious conviction allowed her to exert a distinct and often dominant influence, particularly in matters concerning Castile, which was the larger and wealthier of the two realms. From the moment she ascended the throne in 1474, Isabella faced the immediate challenge of a civil war against supporters of her niece, Joanna la Beltraneja. Isabella's decisive leadership during this war, known as the War of the Castilian Succession, was crucial to her victory. She personally involved herself in the organization of troops, the management of logistics, and the diplomatic efforts to secure support. Chroniclers noted her presence among the soldiers, inspiring loyalty and dedication. Her active campaigning contrasted sharply with the more traditional role of a queen, establishing her as a formidable ruler in her own right. Isabella's influence was most evident in her domestic policies and reforms. She was a driving force behind the reorganization of the Castilian justice system, establishing the Santa Hermandad, a powerful law enforcement body which significantly reduced crime and asserted royal authority over the nobility. She also reformed the royal treasury, restoring financial stability to a kingdom burdened by debt. These reforms, often initiated and overseen by Isabella, centralized power in the crown and laid the groundwork for a more unified and effective state. Her profound religious zeal played a critical role in her governance. Isabella was instrumental in the establishment of the Spanish Inquisition in 1478. While Ferdinand supported it, Isabella was its primary advocate and champion, believing it essential for religious unity and the purification of the Catholic faith. The Inquisition, an autonomous body, directly answerable to the crown, became a powerful tool for social and political control, enforcing religious conformity across Castile and Aragon. The decrees issued by the Inquisition, often reflecting Isabella's devout beliefs, had a profound impact on Spanish society for centuries. Isabella was also the primary patron of Christopher Columbus's voyages across the Atlantic. Despite initial skepticism from Ferdinand and his advisors, Isabella saw the potential for evangelism and expansion, and she personally authorized and funded Columbus's expeditions. Her decision to pawn her own jewels to finance the voyages, though perhaps a dramatic embellishment, highlights her personal commitment and belief in the venture. The success of these voyages led to the establishment of the vast Spanish Empire in the Americas, transforming Spain into a global power. Isabella personally oversaw the early administration of the new territories, issuing decrees to govern the treatment of indigenous populations and the collection of resources. Throughout their reign, royal decrees and charters were often issued in the names of both Ferdinand and Isabella, but contemporary accounts and the content of the decrees often suggest Isabella's particular interest and leadership in Castilian affairs. She was known to hold separate councils from Ferdinand, focusing on matters unique to Castile, and her decisions were often binding. Her strong will and clear vision shaped the identity of Spain in a way that Ferdinand alone could not have achieved. Even in their shared endeavors, like the Reconquista, Isabella's unwavering commitment to expelling the Moors and her presence during the siege of Granada were pivotal. She was a sovereign who commanded authority and respect, guiding her, half of the emerging Spanish superstate, from a position of profound independent power. Number 4. Blanch of Castile. Blanch of Castile, Queen of France, and mother of King Louis IX, was perhaps one of the most effective and powerful regents in medieval European history. Her husband, Louis VIII, died in 1226, leaving behind a 12-year-old heir, Louis IX. The kingdom was in a precarious state, with powerful feudal lords constantly challenging royal authority and internal stability. Blanche, a Spanish princess by birth, quickly demonstrated a formidable will and exceptional political skill to secure her son's throne and preserve the Capetian monarchy. Upon her husband's death, Blanche immediately assumed the regency. Her position was not universally accepted, as many French barons resented being ruled by a woman and a foreigner. A formidable coalition of powerful nobles, led by Peter Mauclair, Duke of Brittany, and Hugues X of Lusignan, rose in rebellion, aiming to seize control of the young king and undermine the crown. Blanche, however, did not waver. She acted with remarkable speed and decisiveness. Rather than waiting for the rebels to besiege Paris, she proactively took the young Louis IX on a journey to the loyal city of Orléans. This bold move gathered support from loyalists and prevented the rebels from capturing the royal person. When the rebellious barons tried to intercept the royal party, Blanche famously put on armor and rode at the head of her escort, personally overseeing the defense. Courage and determination rallied the royal forces and deterred the rebels from direct confrontation. Blanche's regency was a continuous struggle against rebellious vassals. She tirelessly traveled across the kingdom, leading armies, conducting sieges, and negotiating treaties. She skillfully employed a combination of military force, shrewd diplomacy, and strategic marriages to neutralize her opponents one by one. For instance, she negotiated peace with the powerful Count Raymond VII of Toulouse, bringing an end to the Albigensian Crusade in 1229 and incorporating his vast territories into the royal domain. This was a significant territorial gain for the French crown, achieved largely through Blanche's astute political maneuvering. She also oversaw the education and upbringing of her son Louis IX, ensuring he was prepared for his future role as king. She instilled in him a deep sense of piety and justice, qualities that would later define his reign. Even after Louis came of age and formally assumed power, Blanche continued to exercise considerable influence. Louis IX, known for his devotion to his mother, often sought her counsel and entrusted her with important governmental responsibilities. When Louis IX departed on the Seventh Crusade in 1248, he once again appointed his mother as regent. This second regency, lasting until 1252, was another period of strong and effective governance. Blanche managed the kingdom's finances, maintained law and order, and dealt with several peasant uprisings, including the Pastoreau Crusade. Her administrative skills ensured that the kingdom remained stable despite the king's absence and the heavy financial burden of the crusade. Chroniclers of the time, such as Matthew Paris, though sometimes critical of her foreignness, generally praised her intelligence, firmness, and devotion to the crown. Her efforts not only preserved the Capetian dynasty, but significantly strengthened the French monarchy, laying the groundwork for the powerful kings who would follow. Blanch of Castile, by her unwavering resolve and political acumen, effectively ruled France during two crucial periods, shaping the destiny of one of Europe's most powerful kingdoms, from a position of regency. Number 3. Catherine de' Medici. Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France, wife of King Henry II, and mother to 3 successive kings of France, is one of the most enigmatic and powerful women of the French Renaissance. Born into the powerful Medici banking family of Florence, she arrived in France as a foreign princess, often overlooked and underestimated. However, after the death of her husband, she stepped into the role of Queen Mother and then Queen Regent, and for over 3 decades, she exerted immense influence over French politics, particularly during the turbulent French Wars of Religion. Catherine's period of significant power began in 1559 with the accidental death of her husband, King Henry II. Her eldest son, Francis II, became king, but he was young and frail. More importantly, he was heavily influenced by his powerful in-laws, the Guise family, who marginalized Catherine. However, Francis II died after only a year, and her second son, Charles IX, ascended the throne at the age of 10. This finally gave Catherine the opportunity to become regent. As regent, Catherine immediately sought to end the religious strife between Catholics and Protestants, Huguenots, that was tearing France apart. She tried to pursue a policy of religious toleration, arranging the Colloquy of Poissy in 1561 and issuing the Edict of Saint-Germain in 1562, which granted limited religious freedom to Huguenots. These efforts, radical for their time, show her pragmatic approach to governance, aiming for stability rather than ideological purity. However, the religious tensions were too deep, and the wars of religion erupted, Catherine, while outwardly seeking peace, often played various factions against each other, using cunning and manipulation to maintain royal authority and her own influence. She kept a close eye on the powerful noble families, using a network of spies and informants to stay ahead of plots and conspiracies. She often held private councils where key decisions were made away from the formal court. Her influence reached its chilling peak in 1572 at the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. After the wedding of her daughter Margaret to the Protestant Henry of Navarre, a failed assassination attempt on the Huguenot leader, Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, sparked a wave of violence. Historians debate the full extent of Catherine's direct involvement, but it is widely accepted that she was part of the royal council that gave the order for the targeted killing of Huguenot leaders, which then spiraled into a horrific slaughter across Paris and beyond. Chronicler Pierre de l'Estoile noted the widespread belief at the time that Catherine was the primary instigator, aiming to eliminate a rising threat to her power and her son's authority. This brutal act, whether masterminded by her or a consequence of her manipulations, undeniably cemented her reputation as a ruthless political operator. Even after Charles IX reached his majority, Catherine continued to exert significant power, often governing alongside her son. She accompanied him on his royal tours, advised him on all matters of state, and managed his daily affairs. When Charles IX died in 1574, her third son, Henry III, ascended the throne. Henry III, often decisive, relied heavily on his mother's counsel and experience. She continued to manage diplomacy, often conducting secret negotiations with foreign powers and internal factions. Her network of female spies, known as her Flying Squadron, gathered intelligence from the courts of Europe and within France, providing her with crucial information that allowed her to anticipate and counter threats. Catherine de' Medici's rule was characterized by a relentless pursuit of power for the monarchy and her own family. She navigated a treacherous political landscape for decades, using marriage alliances, espionage, and calculated brutality. Her influence, while often operating behind the scenes, was profound, shaping the destiny of France during one of its most turbulent periods. She was a queen who, from the shadows, managed to steer the ship of state through a storm of civil war and dynastic intrigue. Number 2. Matilda of England, Empress Matilda. Matilda of England, often known as Empress Matilda due to her marriage to Henry V, Holy Roman Emperor, was a fierce claimant to the English throne in the 12th century. Her father, King Henry I of England, had named her as his heir, an unprecedented move for a woman. He made his barons swear an oath to support her succession. However, upon his death, in 1135, her cousin Stephen of Blois usurped the throne, plunging England into a devastating civil war known as the Anarchy. Matilda's struggle to claim her rightful inheritance highlights a queen who, despite never being formally crowned Queen of England in her own right, exerted a powerful and disruptive influence on the kingdom. Matilda refused to accept Stephen's usurpation. She spent years gathering support and resources, primarily in Anjou, where her second husband, Geoffrey Plantagenet, was count. Her determination was unwavering. In 1139, she launched an invasion of England, landing in Arundel and beginning a long and brutal conflict that lasted for nearly 2 decades. This was not a subtle behind-the-scenes effort, but a direct, forceful assertion of her claim. Throughout the Anarchy, Matilda acted as a sovereign in all but name in the areas she controlled. She established her own court-issued charters, minted coins, and appointed officials. Her documents were written in the style of a monarch, demonstrating her firm belief in her own legitimate right to rule. She attracted powerful allies, such as her half-brother Robert, Earl of Gloucester, who became her chief military commander and advisor. A pivotal moment occurred in 1141, when Matilda's forces captured King Stephen at the Battle of Lincoln. For a brief period, she was acknowledged as Lady of the English, and seemed poised to finally secure the throne. She entered London, the capital, and began making preparations for her coronation. During this time, she behaved like a monarch, issuing decrees and demanding fealty. However, her inability to secure popular support in London, partly due to her stern and unbending nature, led to her expulsion from the city before she could be crowned. Chroniclers, such as William of Malmesbury, noted her harshness and her failure to appease the Londoners, which ultimately cost her the immediate seizure of power. Despite this setback, Matilda continued her fight from her strongholds in the west of England, particularly at Oxford and Devizes. She remained the focal point of the opposition to Stephen's rule, consistently challenging his authority and denying him undisputed control over the entire kingdom. The war became a stalemate, characterized by constant skirmishes, sieges, and shifting loyalties, all fueled by Matilda's persistent claim. Matilda's direct participation in the governance of her territories, her strategic decision-making, and her enduring resolve meant that Stephen could never fully consolidate his power. Her very existence and her active campaigning prevented the kingdom from settling. While she never achieved formal recognition as Queen of England, her relentless pursuit of her claim, her leadership of a military faction, and her effective governance of the territories under her control made her a de facto ruler for a significant portion of the kingdom. Ultimately, the conflict was resolved not by Matilda's direct victory, but through a negotiated settlement in 1153. The Treaty of Winchester stipulated that Stephen would remain king for the remainder of his life, but Matilda's son, Henry Plantagenet, would be recognized as his heir. This outcome, largely a result of Matilda's long and bloody struggle, ensured the Plantagenet succession and cemented her legacy. She had failed to seize the throne for herself, but through her unwavering fight, she had secured it for her son, shaping the future of the English monarchy from a position of persistent, even if not fully recognized. Number 1. Eleanor of Aquitane. Eleanor of Aquitane, one of the most powerful and fascinating women of the Middle Ages, was a duchess in her own right, a queen of France, and later a queen of England. Her long life, spanning much of the 12th century, was a whirlwind of political intrigue, cultural patronage, and significant influence that often operated from behind the scenes, subtly shaping the destinies of two major European kingdoms. Eleanor was the Duchess of Aquitaine, in her own right, inheriting one of the largest and wealthiest duchies in France. This made her a sovereign, not merely a consort, from the moment of her birth. When she married Louis VII of France in 1137, her vast territories greatly augmented the French crown. However, her influence was not limited to her lands. During her marriage to Louis, she often traveled with him, including on the Second Crusade. Chroniclers noted her presence, and she was seen advising her husband on strategic matters. Her strong will and independent mind, however, often clashed with Louis's piety, leading to their divorce in 1152. Just weeks after her annulment from Louis VII, Eleanor shocked Europe by marrying Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou, who was 10 years her junior. 2 years later, Henry became King Henry II of England, and Eleanor became Queen of England. This marriage brought her vast Aquitaine territories under English control, transforming the Guillain landscape of Western Europe. As Queen of England, Eleanor was a central figure at the royal court. She was not a passive consort. She often acted as regent for her husband during his frequent absences in France. During these periods, she presided over the royal council, issued charters, heard legal cases, and managed the royal treasury. Her name appeared on numerous official documents indicating her direct involvement in the governance of the realm. Records from the English Exchequer show her management of royal finances and her influence on appointments. Eleanor also actively managed her own vast Duchy of Aquitaine. She maintained her own court, issued her own laws, and oversaw a complex administration distinct from that of England. She spent considerable time in Poitiers, her capital in Aquitaine, where she fostered a vibrant literary and cultural environment, attracting poets, troubadours, and scholars. This court, often more sophisticated than Henry's English court, served as a center of intellectual and political activity from which she exerted direct rule over her inherited lands. Her relationship with Henry II eventually deteriorated, particularly over his numerous affairs and his attempts to curb the power of her sons. In 1173, she supported her sons, Henry the young king, Richard and Geoffrey, in a rebellion against their father. While this rebellion ultimately failed and led to Eleanor's imprisonment by Henry for 15 years, her role in instigating and supporting it demonstrates her profound political agency and her willingness to challenge even the most powerful monarch. Upon Henry II's death in 1189, her favorite son, Richard the Lionheart, ascended the throne. Eleanor was immediately released, and despite being in her late 60s, once again plunged into active political life. She traveled tirelessly across England, reconciling factions, releasing prisoners, and administering oaths of fealty on Richard's behalf. During Richard's long absence on the Third Crusade and his subsequent imprisonment in Austria, Eleanor acted as regent. She governed England with a firm hand, raised the enormous ransom for Richard's release, and suppressed rebellions. She even personally traveled to Germany to negotiate her son's freedom, a monumental diplomatic undertaking for a woman of her age. After Richard's death, she ensured the succession of her youngest son John over her grandson Arthur. She continued to be a trusted advisor to John, often mediating disputes and engaging in diplomacy. At the remarkable age of 80, she undertook a journey to Castile to escort her granddaughter, Blanch of Castile, back to France for her marriage to Louis VIII, a marriage she had strategically arranged to strengthen relations between England and France. Eleanor of Aquitane, through her long and active life, consistently wielded immense power, directly governing her territories and secretly influencing the highest levels of governance in both France and England, making her a true force behind the thrones of medieval Europe.